So, this is the Hobbit. I cannot guarantee his safety. Understood.
You will see more of Middle-earth than you've ever seen before.
To actually go back inside Middle-earth, it will be a real event movie.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. Richard Armiteidge. All right, now Richard, you've brought yourself to Thorin Oakenshield, and we did have a fan question that asked, what in fact does playing Thorin Oakenshield leave with you as a person and an actor?
I think it's kind of an interesting question because I haven't left Thorin Oakenshield yet. So he's kind of, all of him is still with me. But I think the one thing that I discovered about myself whilst creating the role was the realization about leadership by example. So because I'm not really a bold leader as a person, and I found in him a nobility which is about leading by example, not necessarily by dictation. So really that's the biggest thing that I learned for myself.
All right, so if you're in trouble, pick up a piece of wood and kill somebody.
Yeah.
Now, one of the most interesting things about this particular character is the heavy makeup that you work with. Were you surprised and shocked by how different you look on screen? And was the acting process similar to, say, mask work when you're trying to convey emotion through that makeup and the giant beards?
Yeah, I mean, when I met Peter, actually before meeting Peter, you get a character breakdown, and it does say we'll be required to wear some prosthetics. So I knew there would be something, whether it was some ears or something. I thought maybe, but it was extensive, and the initial manifestation of Thorin was much greater than what you see there. They worked with my own face to try and make it look like it wasn't too dramatic, which was a slow process, and it changed throughout the course of filming. I did do mask work at drama school, so it was useful to see my face and try and make it move in the mirror. And I spent a lot of time doing that. I also worked with Tammy Lane, who was my prosthetics artist, to try and make sure that the flashing on the eyes wasn't too heavy so that I could move my eyebrows. The eyes move in such a sensitive way. I didn't want that to be inhibited in any way because I felt that the key to seeing into Thorin's heart was through his eyes. And I was nervous about having all of that on my face. But I think it worked out okay. And when I took the prosthetic off, my face was much more animated than I normally am as a person, but that was just because of the muscles being exercised a little bit more.
Now, what is it that you think is left behind for audiences today, as opposed to, say, the audiences of Tolkien's time who would have seen it as a direct metaphor for World War I?
Yeah, I mean, it was something I discovered as I was researching The Hobbit, because I read Tolkien's biography, and I think he talks a lot about his experiences in World War I. The loss of his fellowship, I think, really informed what he was writing about. And the rise of evil, in Europe was something very much in his head when he wrote the book. I think audiences of the time would have understood that more closely, but at the same time, we're living in a time where, our children, our friends are going to other parts of the world to fight battles. And particularly with the dwarves, the idea of an exiled people returning home, trying to find their homeland that's a story which pervades, across time. So all of these things resonate for you. They give you ideas, but at the same time, we're making a fantasy movie, essentially aimed at young adults. So you just bear it in mind and try not to get too heavy and political about it.
Well, I think that's the most interesting thing, is ultimately these films are entertainment. It's fun. And I want to ask you about the fun of it, because obviously 266 days of hard work, of emoting under heavy makeup, heavy battle gear, and of course throwing Orcrist around. I mean, how heavy is Orcrist to wave above your head? Is it just a piece of balsa wood, or is it a lovely wetter work?
I've got to say, most of the fun was had offset. The first day I had all the costume on and all the makeup, and it was so hot and heavy, as you've probably heard from many of the other whinging actors on this movie. But I made a conscious decision that I didn't want it to inhibit what I was doing, and I knew that if I really concentrated on the character, that I could, try and have some fun with Thorin. He's not a big bag of laughs, I've got to be honest. It was a challenge looking for a single moment to make him smile. For me, I have fun when I'm being tested and when I'm being pushed. And, this was an endurance test from beginning to end. And if it hadn't been for my fellow dwarves, British, Kiwi, and that coming together of two cultures, I really would have had a lot less fun. But we had such a great cast, and I can't wait to see them again. I started training again at the end of January so that I could swing that heavy sword around that you're talking about. But I was gifted a replica of the sword, so I've had practice. I was very close to taking it to the gym with me and swinging it around.
Yeah. Now, you talk about having fun on set, and I want to perhaps delve into some of the stories that you may not have regurgitated previously. Perhaps ones where the director may have been put in a very embarrassing situation.
Our director put himself in a very embarrassing situation. You might want to not film this because I'll get into trouble. Okay, so at the end of the first film when you see Thorin on the tree and he's about to attack Azog, I didn't really know what Pete was shooting there. And I was trying to run down the tree trunk wearing these massive dwarf boots. And I obviously wasn't coming down quick enough. So Pete got up on the tree and said, no, this is how you do it. He came running down so fast, by the time he got to the bottom, his pants had fallen down around his ankles in front of the entire crew, and they had been filming it. So somewhere there's a video of Pete with his pants around his ankles.
Sir Peter Jackson, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Although he's not the first person to lose their trousers on the set of The Hobbit, I want to take you to a fan question about Dwarfs Illustrated 2012.
This was actually my idea. Don't let Graham McTavish tell you anything different. This was my idea. It was Pete's 50th birthday, and we decided that we would create a naked dwarf calendar. But of course, you know what a naked dwarf looks like. We're loaded with padding. So that was the joke. And basically, every dwarf was a different month in various compromising positions. But there is only one copy which Peter owns. And Graham wanted to make more. And I said, absolutely not. There is only one copy, and there only ever will be.
Obviously, Thorin Oakenshield. You have a strategically placed piece of oak, or?
What happened in the calendar stays in the calendar.
Well, that's all we have time for Mr. December. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll throw it open to the floor. I think we need to talk about the singing, because the first thing that snapped this film away from the normal zeitgeist of action hero movies was the first trailer, which had men, dwarves singing. From your perspective, you were a song and dance man before you went into the more serious side of drama, and what it was like to actually sing in camera, so to speak, with the other dwarves.
I did a production of The Hobbit when I was 13, which was a musical, really. So I knew that Tolkien had written loads of songs through the literature, so I was really excited that they were going to put this song in. Fran Walsh wrote the theme. That Fran is Peter's partner and writing partner, and she wrote the tune. So I was really honoured to have been asked to take the first line of that song. I didn't want him to sound like a singer, so I listened to a lot of Russian church music. I listened to a male voice choir, Welsh male voice choir, and I worked with a pianist, and we slowly took the pitch down and down until we got to a point that it sounded as Tolkien was describing it, which was the deep-throated singing of the dwarves. And then we went into a studio, we recorded it a number of times. I wanted to keep recording it until the end of time because I was not ever happy with it. But yeah, I think it was one of those moments that they didn't know what that song was going to sound like. And when obviously all of the men and the boys, the other dwarves, that blend of sound was so beautiful that they just decided to use it as the trailer. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns.
Did you ever record the full version of that song? I know Neil Finn did it, but it's not as good.
You're about to see the film, and it is quite long. So, if that song had been any longer, I think people would have got a bit impatient. But there was a moment where I nearly got to sing the song at the end. Nearly. But I just thought it was maybe not appropriate that one of the characters would sing. But that was the full version of the song in the movie. Neil Finn did a version of the final song, which he extended and wrote and developed, which I absolutely love. But no, I'm hoping there'll be more singing in movies 2 and 3.
How much of an input did you and the other dwarves have into the final looks of your characters?
The whole process working with Peter and his team was collaborative. At every stage, my opinion was valued, down to the shape of the body, the shape of the costumes, the length of the costume, the length of the hair. I remember asking for more grey at the sides because I felt that it would really give him more age, and I wanted that pelt, the fur pelt, because I'd originally conceived Thorin as being like a bison, and I wanted that upper body bulk. And whenever I didn't have that fur on, I really felt that I was sort of missing a part of him. So as much as it was hot and heavy, and they'd always say, you can do this scene without the pelt if you want, and I'd be like, no, I need it. I like it. It makes me feel like the character.
Can you talk more specifically about how the way you imagined Thorin as a child compares with the role you created under Peter's vision?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I was trying to listen to both of those voices, because I do remember very clearly reading the book as a 12-year-old, and then as a slightly older than 12-year-old man. As a kid, I was focused very much on Bilbo, and then as an adult, I was focusing on Thorin, but I had seen him probably as a bit older. But it was important that he was a potential king, that he was somebody that could return to his throne and lead his people and show his prowess on the battlefield. So I think we found a place which was older than I am, but he still had the youth to be able to swing that sword around and really fight for his people, which was important.
Hey Richard, I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about Peter Jackson's kind of technique with directing actors. So none of the technical direction, just how he gets the performance out of the actors, what he says, does he give you adjustments, etc.?
It was always very difficult to get Peter to sit down before you went onto set to talk about the character or the process or the story. He actually likes to have that conversation while the camera's rolling, so the whole thing feels like an experiment. He loves it when you develop an idea and he'll go with you. It takes a while for you to find that path together. But one of the things he does, which I absolutely love, is that he'll use another actor to get the performance out of somebody. So he doesn't necessarily come to you and say, I want this response. He'll take an actor away that you're going to work with. I had a moment in movie 3, which I can't talk about, with Martin, where I was in the middle of a scene, and he took Martin away. I didn't know that he'd done this, and Martin came back and played something to me which got quite an extraordinary response from me that I had not predicted, and that was the take. And that's exactly what he does. And he did it to me as well. I have a scene with Keely, and he took me aside and he said, I want you to say this, I want you to do this. And, we got the response from Aidan. And it's such a great way to work because you don't know that he's having an effect on you.
From an actor's perspective, can you tell me what you learned that was different doing something as massive as The Hobbit, as opposed to doing TV series like Spooks and Robin Hood, and which do you prefer?
The main thing really is time. And when you've got a budget like we had for The Hobbit, it buys you so much time. So I really, because in television you do 2 or 3 takes and you move on, and there's this urgency to the shoot I mean, don't get me wrong, there was an urgency to the shoot, but there was time to experiment, and really that's what I'm talking about in regards to that last question. But also working on a green screen, which I'd never done before, I was nervous of it, but in fact what it does is it fires up your imagination, and I come from a theatre background, so it was tapping into a lot of old things that I'd forgotten about that you have to imagine, so I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
What elements of Thorin's character can you relate to the most, and do you have any personal life experiences that helped you shape your portrayal of Thorin?
I suppose the thing I really love about Thorin really is that he does have a fear of what he's going to do. He is stepping into the unknown, and he's on a path towards something which is both thrilling. He will get to be a king, and he will accumulate a huge amount of wealth. But at the same time, in that mountain is the most terrifying thing that he's ever experienced in his life, and he has experienced it. The dragon, really, I assimilated that to a Holocaust of some kind. I was using the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima in terms of the extraordinary devastation that it caused. So he's experienced that. So, I think that's the thing that I was most fascinated with, is that he's walking towards something that he wants, but at the same time it's repelling him. And Tolkien did write about that story in the appendices, which we were allowed to use as a source reference. So I love to write a biography for the character, so I used all of that, and then added some things myself that I felt would help me, because I knew we were going to do a prologue. So I tried to imagine what happened on that day when the dragon came, so that when that character opens the door to the mountain and smells the air, it has such a sense memory for him of what happened to him as a child. And all of these things, as much as they burden him, they drive him forward. So it was one of the best reasons to play the role.
Of the scenes or the stunts you were legally allowed to do, what would have been your favourite stunt?
My favourite stunt was one that I didn't know I was going to be able to do. I'd watched my stunt double do it, Mana Davis, who was absolutely brilliant. And it was the scene where, it was actually an additional scene, we did it in pickups, when we're on the mountain, when the stone giants are fighting, and Bilbo falls off the side, and then Thorin climbs down and then falls. And we were doing it on a wire, and Mana came to me and said, I think you can do this. And I was like, okay, if you think I can do it, then I'll do it. Just getting on a wire and doing something that your stunt double has already shot is thrilling. But, I love doing as many of the stunts as possible, not because it gives you a sense of heroicism, but it makes you really feel like you're playing the character. If you get to do everything that the character does, it's just very satisfying.
Who would win in a cage fight, Thorin or Dwalin? And also, would you ever consider coming to Melbourne for a convention?
Yeah, of course I'll come to Melbourne for a convention. As to the cage fight, you mean Dwalin and Thorin in a cage together?
In a cage fight against each other, who would win?
I know that you're a method actor and you immerse yourself in a character and research beforehand. Was that easier or harder with makeup and green screens where a lot of it wasn't there already?
It was kind of essential, actually. A lot of the discomfort with the costume and the prosthetic was alleviated by just staying focused on the character. But also the way Pete works is sometimes he'll just call on you with half a minute to prepare, and you have to dive straight into something. So it was really hard to take my mind off things and engage too much. Although Dwalin and I did have a lot of games of table tennis on G stage. But apart from that, but I was in character. Yeah.
Hi, Richard. You've played a lot of sort of dark, brooding, grumpy characters. I wondered what your experience is, if you can comment on sort of casting to type, and whether you're looking forward to choosing some different sorts of roles in the future.
It's a very good question. I always get very nervous when I read something that feels close to myself, because I predict that I won't get it, because I'm sort of better at being somebody that's very far away from myself, I think. But of course, fantasize about playing, the romantic lead and the heroic character. I just don't think my face suits that. I think that there's something dark and malevolent about me. So yeah, there you go. Was that agreement?
I think you're right. You do look inherently evil.
I do.
We all know that Peter Jackson was an absolute groundbreaker in technology when it came to Lord of the Rings. Were you expecting the level of groundbreaking technology that he included, like the red cameras and the HFR and the extra 3D technology that he was actually shooting live with?
When you're shooting it, you're really not aware of any kind of technological differences between the cameras, apart from the fact that with digital you can do what's called a rolling reset, which is, I think, something Peter just uses himself, whereby you don't cut camera, you just keep going and you go again immediately. And for an actor, that's an absolute gift, because you don't have time to think about it or overthink it or self-note or overanalyze. So it's very freeing. The only thing that was a struggle and a challenge was to get the scale issue right. He developed a technique called slave motion control, where some actors are in a green room, some are on a scale set, and the two cameras are coordinated. So often, I think I had one scene in the second movie, which we're not allowed to talk about, whereby there were 300 people on set, and I was alone in a green room with 25 eye lines, little crosses on the wall. But again, you try to fire up your imagination, you go back onto the main set, you rehearse again, and you take that feeling away with you, and you just shoot immediately. So yeah, lots of challenges.
What was it like filming scene 88, I think it was, the wall chase? We heard from Dean, Stephen and Graham that it was really full on. What was it like for you?
They're just weak. Scene 88 was a chase sequence, and it felt like we ran throughout the whole of the North and the South Islands. But it was so great to be out in those incredible locations, places that I've never seen in my life and probably never will again. But I do remember every day strapping up my ankles with tape, because the ground was so uneven that you could really twist your ankle, and obviously you can't have limping Thorin at the front of scene 88, can you? So no, it was a challenge.
Now, Richard, Andy Serkis's work has been groundbreaking, and he got to work with Martin Freeman. But there's another character who I can imagine you wouldn't think would be working in a mocap situation. And it's the character played by Benedict Cumberbatch. And a thought hit me that it's quite possible that Peter Jackson would get Smaug and you in the room together. And I'm just wondering whether that's happened or whether you've actually talked about it.
That's a real spoiler. I went into the motion capture studio because I wanted to see how Benedict worked. I'm a huge fan of his. I love the fact that they've cast him, because it means that the dragon has an incredible intellect and an incredible voice. I also think that they maybe are going to use certain aspects of his bone structure in the face of the dragon, but nobody knows yet. But I don't know if Thorin and Smaug ever come face to face. That's something I'll find out when we go back to do reshoots. I hope so.
And finally, I'd like to, something that's been touched on with a few questions, but I think it's summed up in the fact that you worked in the appendices and you went back to the original material, and you were influenced by Tolkien, and many fans here were inspired by Tolkien, and now seeing it come to life is one thing. But I'm wondering, what would you ask him about your character and this story, if you could?
The one thing that I would want to know, and it's something that, again, I tried to fill in my little biography, was who was the love of his life. Because I felt that he's sacrificed his life, or he's given up something for his people, for his quest. And I did imagine that there might have been, a princess that he would have been betrothed to as king under the mountain. So that's probably what I would ask Tolkien. I know. Are you welling up?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that sums it up. Richard Armiteijdge in a nutshell, a class act. Please put your hands together for an actor and a man who's brought Tolkien to life.
One of the biggest moments was when we all put our gear on and we all stood together, sort of looking around at each other into the characters' faces. To stand in a circle and look at the guys that were going on the quest, I got a real tingle up my spine.